How will we address the climate crisis? Climate One with Greg Dalton brings together advocates, influencers, and policymakers in empowering conversations that connect all aspects of the climate emergency, the individual and the systemic, the scary and the exciting, to help you understand the most critical issue of our time. Because addressing the climate crisis begins by talking about it.
Jane Fonda has been many things, an actor, fitness guru, and mother. But through it all, her activism has remained her true calling. For decades, she's been a passionate critic of the Vietnam War and supporter of Indigenous, LGBTQ, and women's rights. Inspired by Naomi Klein and Greta Thunberg, in 2019 she began protesting on the steps of the U.S. Capitol in an action she called Fire Drill Fridays to bring awareness to the urgency of the climate crisis. Over a lifetime of activism, she's realized the power of taking a stand and speaking out for what she believes in, as well as fighting for those with less privilege. Jane Fonda, today on Climate One. When you were a school child growing up, and your home was not a happy place. Your father, Henry Fonda, played many iconic roles, including Abe Lincoln, and you said that you grew up in the shadow of a national monument. Your mother struggled with mental health, and you found solace outdoors with trees, climbing trees, getting to know the bugs and creatures in nature. You know, how did that connection with the natural world shape you and who you are today?
Finding solace in nature when you're a young child. You know, if it's not a happy home, there's always the trees and the flowers. And my desire growing up was I wanted to be I didn't know the word indigenous, I wanted to be an Indian boy. Sometimes I wanted to be the Lone Ranger, sometimes I wanted to be Tonto. Yeah. Because of the way they were with nature, the symbiotic relationship, the knowledge that you were part of nature, that nature was a living thing that you were part of. And I grew up at the end of a dirt road up on the top of a hill overlooking the ocean. There were no other houses anywhere, and there were bobcats and mountain lions and coyotes and meadowlarks. And you know, if you have loved these things as a child and then they're not there anymore, I mean, where are the meadowlarks? Do you know that there are 3 billion fewer birds now than we had in 1970? And if you're like me, I loved bird songs. That leaves a hole in your soul, you know, and every summer I spent all my time in the ocean at the Santa Monica Bay. And you can't go swimming there now. And then whales are washing up dead. And we know why. But I love whales. I love I scuba dive with penguins and marine iguanas and sea turtles. And when you've been face to face with a sea turtle, no, really, and you look into those eyes, you know that you're part of that. And I'm sure that all of you saw my octopus teacher. I've seen about 5 times. Right? Yeah. I mean, they're sentient creatures, and I just kind of knew that intuitively as a child. And so I always cared.
Yeah, that you're part of nature. It's not something to dominate or extract resources from. You reveal a lot about your feelings and your relationship with your parents, food, your body, in a fabulous HBO documentary that I highly recommend called Jane Fonda in 5 Acts. And it's fabulous. It's amazing how much you reveal, so vulnerable, and what an amazing, amazing story. And in that, I learned that in 1968, you were living in Paris, and your mentor, Simone Signoret, a member of France's intellectual left, invited you to a large protest against the Vietnam War. And you write in your memoir that, quote, "For the first time, I felt embarrassed for my country. I also wanted to go home. So take us to that moment when you went to your first protest. I'm not sure you could even find Vietnam on a map at that point. What powerful awakening was that for you?
Well, my father was a decorated Navy officer in the Second World War, and it was a very important time for him. I just grew up assuming that any place that U.S. troops were fighting, we were on the side of the angels. We all want to feel that we have meaning in our lives. You know, we all want to be able to say, why am I here? And I know that there's a reason. And boy, I was so far, I didn't even know I was supposed to ask myself things like that. Anyway, I fell in love with a Frenchman, and I moved there, and a director, and he directed Barbarella. And been married to Bardot and Deneuve before me. I mean, it was complicated. And I remember very well, we were in Saint-Tropez, and it was when Johnson started bombing North Vietnam. And it was in the headlines of the paper. And my husband, Vadim, looked at that and he said, you know, "Nom de Dieu, mais ils sont fous." He could not believe that our elected officials were so stupid as to believe what they were being told and to go ahead and permit this to happen. And I thought, well, who the hell does he think he is? Sour grapes, just because you all lost. I didn't say this out loud. But, you know, the French had colonized Vietnam, and the Vietnamese had beat them too. So I just thought it was sour grapes. I really didn't know. I didn't know where Vietnam was. And Simone Signoret had kind of had a crush on my dad. And so when I went to France to make a movie, she, being the elder she was, took me under her wing. We ate meals together a lot, and that's where I learned that the French eat forever and drink wine forever into the night, and it was so great. Anyway, she used to bring me to anti-war demonstrations where Simone de Beauvoir was speaking, and Camus was speaking, and Sartre, and I didn't understand any of it, really. And then in 1968, I was extremely pregnant, and American soldiers who had fought in Vietnam and then left, deserted, resisted, came to Paris, and Alexander Calder. That's whose home they stayed in. But they didn't have clothes, and so they were in dentists and doctors, and so they would look for compatriots who lived there to help them. And so a group of them sought me out, and I said, well, why did you leave? What's going on? And they told me stories about how American troops were treating civilian soldiers, and I didn't believe them. I could not believe, and they gave me a book by Jonathan Schell called The Village of Ben Suk, S-U-C. It was a small book, and I read it in one sitting, and when I finished that book, I was a different person. It was a book about how the government had requested that civilians be round up and put in these kind of stockades. I determined right then that I couldn't stay in France. I didn't want to be criticizing my country in another country, that I had to go home. I left my family and I came back. And so the first people I went to know what to do were GIs. I became part of the GI movement, which was active duty soldiers and sailors and Marines and Air Force. I mean, it was all branches of the military. And outside a lot of the bases, there were these coffee shops that had been created by anti-war activists as places where soldiers could come to learn about Vietnam, to learn the history. And there was one called the Oleo Strut outside of Fort Hood in Killeen, Texas. It was one of the first coffee houses that I went to. And what really did it for me was a woman named Terry Davis. It was always the women that I met who were part of the anti-war movement. I had never met people like that. I knew so many frigging rich people. I can't tell you. I mean, people who ran countries and huge corporations, and I'd seen all of the wealth in the world and smart people and stuff. But this woman to me epitomized what took over my soul. Her name was Terry Davis. And she didn't treat me like a celebrity. She saw me. I was supposed to lead a rally in the following week with soldiers that were going to come. She wanted to be sure I felt okay about it, what I was going to say. being with her was like looking through a keyhole at the world that we were fighting for. It was like getting into a warm bath. And I realized there's a lot of these people in the world that are totally different than the people that I've grown up with. I want to be like them. They were all women. It was a profound, soul-altering experience for me.
On Thanksgiving Day in 2016, you went to Standing Rock to protest the Dakota Access Pipeline. Candy Mossett, a 37-year-old member of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Akira Nation, was quoted in The Guardian as saying, quote, "What's the narrative here? Oh, we want to help the poor Indians on Thanksgiving of all days? We're trying to make people understand we don't need celebrities to come and feed us and get a photo op and just leave." How does it feel to hear those words now?
It was fine. It wasn't referring to me. What I brought was 15,000 pounds of bison and yurts, because it was very, very cold. It happened that another person that I know brought a lot of turkeys and roasted them. It was kind of fun, the way it was done. And I helped serve them. But no, I went there with yurts and bison meat. And the courage that they were showing was enormous. But the thing that made me the happiest when there, see, when I was at Alcatraz, there was a real schism. There were those American Indian movement wanted to assimilate. They wanted to leave behind the ceremonies and all of that, if I understand correctly. And then there were those who, like Thomas Benyaka, the Hopi spiritual leader, was there. It was the first time that Wilma Mankeller had met a spiritual guide, and there were those who were saying, no, we need the prayers and the sweat lodges and so forth. And when I got to Standing Rock, it was the prayers and ceremonies and sweat lodges that had won out. There were so many young people who said that those ceremonies had helped them kick booze and drugs, and they were very into it, and that's a really good thing, I think. Yeah. Right.
I don't think anyone accuses you of celebrity photo op activism, for sure. Eckhart Tolle, in his book, A New Earth, said, quote, "Whatever behavior the ego manifests, the hidden motivating force is always the same. The need to stand out, be special, be in control. The need for power, for attention, for more." How do you think about your own drives and ego and your own climate activism? Because a lot of activism is about, I'm right, look at me, do the right thing, what I say.
Well, that's totally why I'm there. I mean, why else? No, actually, for me, it's very selfish. I was really going down a rabbit hole of despair. I was very heartened by that incredible outpouring of activism globally, led by Greta Thunberg in 2019. But I didn't know what to do. I knew I had a platform, and I wasn't doing enough, and I was so depressed. And then I read Naomi Klein's book. I had read all her books, but this was a smaller book, and it arrived the day I was leaving to go up with friends of mine to Big Sur, the galleys of On Fire, the burning case for a Green New Deal. And so I got up there to Big Sur, and I sat down and I read the book, and it hit me. When you're ready for it, maybe one of you would read the book now and it wouldn't have this impact, but to me it was like I could feel a lightning bolt hit my solar plexus. And I found a place that had a signal. It was just like 1 foot. And I called. And I think it's one of the smartest things I ever did in my life. I called Annie Leonard because I knew that she was really brave and bold, and she'd done such great things at Greenpeace. And I said, I want to move to D.C., and I want to camp out in front of the White House, and I want to raise a ruckus. And my only concern is I don't know where to poop. See, I have... I love to climb mountains. I do my best above 14,000 feet. I have pooped in the wilderness, and I know what to do, but not in a city. I didn't know what to do. And she laughed, and she said, I'm so happy that you want to put yourself your body on the line like this, but you don't have to worry about pooping because it's illegal now to camp in front of the White House, but she said, okay, let me think about this, and she set up the next day a conference call with Bill McKibben and Naomi Klein, and then Jay Helfand. I thought, what's she got a lawyer on here for? Of course, now I understand, because I know Jay Helfand. But at any rate, it was at Esalen. It was the only place that had a payphone, and I had to borrow a lot of quarters, and it was a long time. So hot. And putting quarters in. But that's where Fire Drill Friday was born. We didn't have a name for it yet, but the idea of engaging in a rally and then civil disobedience every Friday. And anyway, and the moment that happened, my depression disappeared. And I have found that every single time I start to get depressed, if I take action, it disappears. Greta Thunberg said, don't go looking for hope. Look for action, and hope will come. And she's right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's research that backs that up, that doing helps. And the community you find in doing is part of that, the relationships. It's the action in concert with other people.
Exactly.
So you were arrested with a bunch of celebrities.
And a bunch of non-celebrities. I mean, this wasn't just all about... What I loved about it is celebrities introduced frontline activists, whose voices wouldn't be heard, and it was all recorded, and we have it in perpetuity, and lots and lots and lots and lots of people watch this stuff. And people traveled from all over the country, mostly women, mostly older women.
And many of whom watched your videos, and that's why they were there.
Well, they like Grace and Frankie, too. I mean, I've been out there in the trenches as an activist when people really hated me. And then I've been out there in the trenches when I was Grace and Frankie and people loved me. And so I've been at both, and it really helps to have a good, successful TV series behind you. You're going out there.
When you were arrested in Washington, D.C., it was your first time since the 1970s. You had your mugshot taken, you were handed a bologna and cheese sandwich, you were locked in your cell. What would take us to that moment? What were your thoughts and feelings when you click you're in a jail cell in Washington, D.C. for protesting on climate?
This may sound weird, but when you are putting your body on the line for something that you would give your life for, the deepest thing you can possibly believe in, while they're putting the handcuffs on, those damn white plastic things, they hurt like hell, but you feel so liberated. I felt so free. It was weird, huh? But, I'll have to be honest. I'm white, I'm famous, I'm privileged, so I knew they weren't going to hurt me. They weren't so nice in Cleveland the first time that it happened, but I knew that I was safe, so it was really my job to kind of record what was going on. And what was going on were men and women of color, because this was just the overnight holding place where we were. Psychotic breaks, screaming all night. We just don't in this country know how to handle mental health crises. These people should never have been in a jail. They should never have been arrested. And it was just, I was fine, but I just was... The next morning, I was taken out of an individual cell and put into a holding with about 12 other women, all of them African American. One of them was really cold. She was so beautiful, and she was shivering. I gave her my red coat for a while. And then they got worried that I was cozying up to these people too much, and so they took me out and moved me away. But, here's the reality. They said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I was protesting the climate crisis." Just barely survival is on their minds. How do I get my next meal? How do I buy my next tit? I did not try to proselytize while I was there. Yeah, I felt pretty helpless, actually.
So you did that for a period of time. Many people were arrested, famous people, regular people, lots of brave people. What do you think that Fire Drill Fridays accomplished?
Okay. We were not, as has been reported in the press, our goal was not to affect government. Our goal was, look, we know from the Yale Communications Project, Climate Communications Project, that there are a majority of Americans, like 70%, are very concerned about the climate, but they haven't taken action. And they say because they haven't been asked. The great unasked. This is our job now, is to reach the great unasked. So that's what, we got a lot of press. We had a great press guy working with us, Ira Arlick. And the word got out that this old lady, I turned 81 when I was in jail. And I knew that people would say, well, God, if she can do it. So people started coming from all over. I mean, Portland and San Francisco and all over Wisconsin. And they'd never been at a rally before. They'd never been arrested. But they did it, and they felt great about it. Yeah. So that was I was asking the great unasked to join, to move beyond concern into action.
Let's discuss how you think societal change happens.
Because there's got to be two prongs to what needs to happen. One is there have to be unprecedented numbers of people in the streets, peacefully, nonviolently, disrupting business as usual. This is what got Roosevelt to create the New Deal. There were thousands and thousands of people in the streets, unions in particular, demanding the things that that needed to be done. And he met with some of them, and they told him what they wanted. And you know what he said? And this is so important. He said, okay, now go out and make me do it. That's really an important lesson. You know, in 1970, First Earth Day, do you know how many people came out? 20 million. 20 million people came out on First Earth Day. And you know what happened because of that? Nixon created the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and the EPA. A conservative Republican. You know, protest matters if the numbers are large and the demands are strategic. So that's one half of the strategy that has to happen.
And the other half is, some people say electoral politics has failed us. We have a cash and carry Congress. Do you think electoral politics matters?
Well, yeah. If you can't change the people, change the people. Annie Leonard gave me that line. There are all these Democrats who take money from the fossil fuel industry, and they will not let good legislation pass. It almost happened with the Build Back Better bill. And one of the important parts of the big Build Back Better bill was a provision that called for cutting the $20 billion we taxpayers give to the fossil fuel industry every year. That would be such an important thing to have happen. And Henry Cuellar, a moderate Democrat who takes money from the fossil fuel industry in Texas, and 4 other oily Democrats persuaded Nancy Pelosi to take that provision out. Okay, now, Cuellar was up for re-election. Running against him was a young Hispanic woman named Jessica Cisneros. Henry Cuellar is also anti-choice. He's not only pro-oil, he's anti-choice. The Democratic Party backed him. She lost by 800 votes. She's a climate champion and brave and bold, pro-choice, and she lost by 800 votes. This has to change. One of the reasons that we haven't gotten good legislation for too long in California, finally last year the governor created the setbacks, but we have not been able to get good anti-fossil fuel legislation in California because of oily Democrats in the legislature. We have to get them out. Because it doesn't matter how many thousands of people you have in the streets, the Joe Manchins of the world aren't going to pay attention. You have to get people who will care about what we're demanding and be serving people and not corporations. And that's what the Jane Fonda Climate PAC is all about. That's all we focus on, is getting out the oily electors, especially the Democrats, and we primary them strategically. And we want to get climate champions elected to office up and down ballot. Because right now, it's You can't get much done in Congress right now, but down ballots, state legislatures, city councils, supervisors, controllers, they have such power. You have no idea how much influence they could have over this climate crisis. And they don't get support. Every dollar that goes to them means so much. And you know, Jane Fonda comes along, I can increase the amount of money they make, I can get volunteers to come out, get media, it really, really helps. Last year, we endorsed 60 candidates, 42 of them won their general election. And I went on the road with some of them, and I can't tell you, they're mostly women, many women of color, brave women, brave people. If you could go out with me, you'd have enough hope for the rest of your life. They're there, and they're ready, and we have to support them.
You lived in Georgia for 20 years, and after you arrived, you realized that a lot of people didn't like you there. Being married to Ted Turner helped. What did you learn from that experience about crossing that cultural divide that's even more profound now in our country? What did you learn living in Georgia?
Well, I learned, you know, people talk about the elitists on the coasts, and it's true. You know, I am so grateful for my 20 years in Georgia because I knew the coasts and I knew Paris because I married the French guy. And so living in Georgia, I was raised an atheist, and you know, I'm surrounded. Everybody I knew went to church. It made me really, really consider that. And I entered the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, which is the training center for black ministers. I was the only white person. I studied there for a couple of years. I studied the Bible.
What did you learn about empathy?
I learned empathy earlier than I learned empathy talking to GIs. But what I learned in Georgia was to listen with my heart and to not move so fast and to try to understand why people felt the way they did.
I have a climate-conscious therapist who helps me deal with the load of this work. What self-care do you practice, and how does your inner work sustain your outer work and your activism?
Well, I've discovered that it's absolutely critical for activists to pay attention to their inner lives and their outer lives. We need rest, we need sleep, we need to eat healthy, we need to keep our energy up. So I do.
Well, thank you for sharing your passion and your courage here on the stage. It means a lot to all of us. It's been a pleasure to be part of this.